والآن في مقبرة روم.
Looks like it was one of the Afghan cameleers, which is buried here in Coolgardie.
Carrie story, right there, and you actually to wooden baths. It's not wooden. You have to eat wooden baths and have a blue spot in him.
Wow, dingo. What do you think the dingo done to the camel?
Tail whack. Ew.
Dingo came to the camel.
You try to catch me. You try to catch me.
Funny story, you make a proper story.
Zach, Shihab and their two brothers embarked on a long journey to explore the history of the Australian Muslim cameleers in the vast Australian outback. The boys love camping and adventures and spent most nights of the trip camped by the side of the track wherever they had reached. Starting in the 1860s and continuing through the early 1900s, around 3,000 camel handlers came to Australia. These men would become known as the Afghan cameleers, and their contribution to this country was more significant than most people realise. They pioneered transport and communication routes across the outback and contributed enormously to opening up inland Australia. Although the cameleers came from different ethnic groups and from many places, Baluchistan, Kashmir, Sindh, Rajasthan, Egypt, Persia, Turkey and Punjab, they were collectively known as Afghans. Two small legacies of the cameleers are the date palms, which they planted wherever they went, and the Ghan train, which is named after them. The boys went on two trips, which they later called the G'day Cameleers expedition. The first trip was from Perth, north to the Kimberley and back, in July 2017. The second was in January 2018 from Perth to the Goldfields, then across the border into South Australia, through Port Augusta, Adelaide, Farina, Marree and Oodnadatta. They continued up north into the Northern Territory, through Alice Springs and Katherine, then headed west into Western Australia to Windham, Broome and Carnarvon, then back to Perth. They travelled over 18,500 kilometres in just 31 days. Camels were indispensable on the Western Australian goldfields in the 1890s, carrying food, water, machinery and other supplies. They helped keep the towns of Kalgoorlie and Coolgardie alive. By 1898, there were 300 Muslims in Coolgardie. They established a new community in and around Bailey Street, which was wide enough for a camel train to turn unhindered. They constructed a tin mosque to perform their daily prayers soon after arriving.
This looks like it was one of the Afghan cameleers, which is buried here in Coolgardie Cemetery. This is the Muslim section in Coolgardie. As we can see, only 3 of them are marked.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Malik Yawmiddin, Iyyak na'budu wa iyyak nasta'in, Ihdinas siratal mustaqim, siratal ladhina.
This is the grave of Taj Muhammad, who died by the hands of assassin at Coolgardie, January 10th, 1896. He was assassinated when he was washing for prayer. This is the grave of Haji Mullah Marhaban, who died on July 28th, 1897, with an age of 96. This is the grave of Amir Bux, who was educated by his son, who died in 1897 and was born in 1827.
Faiz Muhammad was born in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and came to Australia at the age of 22 with his younger brother Targ, with Elder's first shipment of camels as chief cameleer. The brothers later became camel importers and merchants themselves, borrowing money from Elder to start their carrying business.
Now we're in Kalgoorlie, where lots of cameleers worked and carried goods in and out of this town for over 60 years. Without doubt, they're one of the pioneers which helped in the Goldfields.
From Marree, Faiz and Targ Muhammad and many of their compatriots followed the great 1893 Western Australian gold rush to Kalgoorlie and Coolgardie, taking supplies to the diggers. Unfortunately, the younger of the brothers, Targ, was shot on the 10th of January 1896 by an Afghan rival tribesman by the name of Ghulam Muhammad at the door of the Coolgardie Mosque. He was only 37 years of age. The case was reported in most newspapers, both in Western Australia and South Australia.
This morning we're in Norseman, and these tin camels are here to commemorate the Muslim cameleers.
Camels were indispensable on the Western Australian goldfields in the 1890s. However, the presence of the cameleers also fostered racist fears and economic jealousies. Bullock teamsters and other goldfield workers saw the dark-skinned Asiatic Muslim cameleers as cheap labour and unwanted competition, especially in the transport industry. The cameleers were demonised in the press and accused of various acts of aggression, including monopolising waterholes. In 1901, Hugh Mahon, the federal member for Coolgardie, questioned Prime Minister Barton about reports that Afghan camel drivers frequently take forcible possession of wells, often polluting them, by washing their clothes and persons therein. In the light of such serious breaches of the peace, Mahon asked whether Afghans now residing in Western Australia would be deported. Mahon's question set off a chain of correspondence between the Prime Minister, the Premier of Western Australia, and the state's police commissioner. The commissioner noted that while reports and rumours of Afghans polluting the water and taking forcible possession of dams had been received on various occasions, no evidence was obtainable to substantiate the claims. The only occurrence of a serious nature that had come to their attention was when an Afghan was shot and wounded by a white teamster named Kelly for failing to give way.
Today we just woke up, packed our car, and we're ready to go across the border from Western Australia to South Australia in about 30 minutes. And our aim is to get to Port Augusta.
Across the border from Western Australia to South Australia, and our aim was to get to Port Augusta to see where the first cameleers boarded Australia.
Did you know how hard it was when the cameleers, they had to carry their own food? Because most towns, they didn't have halal food.
And they had to carry supplies and resources, right?
Yeah, and how it took like months and months for them to travel from place to place.
Yeah, because they don't have any engines on their camels.
Yeah, and they don't go 110 kilometers per hour.
I mean, they're riding camels. Obviously, it's going to be hard.
How?
I mean, it's hot there.
They can walk for the camels.
They have no tents. All they have to do is ride the camel.
They probably did have tents.
But while tensions ran high in Kalgoorlie, others were grateful for the Cameleers' efforts during the Federation drought, which had devastated Eastern Australia from 1895 to 1902. It is no exaggeration to say that if it had not been for the Afghan and his camels, John Edwards wrote to the Attorney-General in 1902, Wilcannia, White Cliffs, Tibooburra, Milparinka and other towns, each centres of considerable population, would have practically ceased to exist.
We're in Port Augusta now, where the first camels with their camel drivers has arrived from India. They're on their port.
There are about 1 to 2 million camels in Australia, and it's all started from that port there.
Legend has it that the first camel ever on Australian soil arrived at Port Adelaide in 1840, but was shot in 1846 after it caused the death of explorer John Horrocks. As early as 1858, it was suggested in Victoria that camels should be imported into the colony and that a depot should be established for their propagation and acclimation. In 1858, George Landell, well-known exporter of horses to India, was commissioned by the Victorian Exploration Committee to buy camels and recruit camel drivers. 24 camels and 3 drivers, 2 of whom were Muslim, arrived in Melbourne in 1860 to join the Burke and Wills expedition. In 1862, Samuel Stuckey went to Karachi to bring out camels. He was unsuccessful that time, as was Mackay from Mount Deception in 1864 to 1865. However, in 1866, Stuckey succeeded in obtaining more than 100 camels and 31 cameleers, which were landed at Port Augusta in South Australia. In 1884, another 300 camels and 56 camel drivers were landed at Port Augusta. The largest group landed in 1893, when 400 camels and 94 men disembarked. During his election speech at Port Augusta, South Australia, in March 1893, Alexander Poynton made it clear that he was against the importation of more Afghans and their camels. If elected, he would put a prohibitive poll tax upon them. A month later, it was reported that 94 Afghans had landed at Port Augusta and meant business and money-getting. Contemporary opinions about their presence in the outback were not always very kind.
Here we are standing in front of the most oldest operating mosque in Australia.
This mosque is located in Adelaide and cost £450 to make.
I was honored to do Friday prayer in this mosque that's behind me right now.
Yeah, it was fun praying here, especially for Friday prayer.
Yeah, one of the most compulsory prayer out of all the 5.
Most of the
prayers.
men and their camels were first brought to Thomas Elder's station, Umbaratana, but after a few months, most were transferred to Beltana near Flinders Ranges, where the camels and their drivers began transporting materials and supplies to Elder's stations at Blanchwater and Mernpowie. Meanwhile, at Beltana, a camel breeding program was initiated. Without the cameleers, much of the development of the outback would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible. Whole communities, towns, mining establishments, pastoral properties, and some well-known explorations in the interior succeeded as a result of their contributions. Yet, the cameleers often suffered from racial prejudice as a result of their religion, culture, or the economic competition they provided for a declining number of jobs. They lived most of their lives marginalised, mostly misunderstood and discriminated against. They were socially isolated in self-made ghettos on the edge of many towns across the outback, known as Ghan towns, along with their herds of camels, mosques, spicy exotic food, strange clothing, traditions, and foreign languages. The cameleers and their teams worked under conditions too harsh for other transporters, carrying cargoes across the outback for weeks in scorching summers and the piercing cold of winter in some of the harshest terrain in the world. With their camels, who received more publicity than their owners, they helped with the construction of the overland telegraph line and railways, erected fences, acted as guides for several major expeditions, and supplied almost every inland mine or station with its goods and services. Cameleers continued to live as they had always done, following their Islamic teachings and their tribal customs. Most Cameleers who came to Australia were single, or if married, left their wives behind as they expected to return in a better financial position in the near future. Many of them remained single, but others married Aboriginal women and a few married white women. Gul Muhammad landed in Fremantle, WA in 1897. Then moved to South Australia, where he worked on the railhead. He carted copper by camel from Blinman, Queensland, to Parachilna, South Australia, and later worked at Marree, also in South Australia. He was one of the contributors for the construction of the original Perth Mosque and worked in the WA Goldfields before settling in Adelaide in the 1940s, where he became the imam of the Adelaide Mosque. Gul married a French woman, Desiree Lazia, in Kalgoorlie Mosque in 1907. They had 6 children together. Desiree converted to Islam and was known as Miriam Beebe. He had planned to return home in 1950 and had purchased a ticket to do so, but died suddenly and was buried in Adelaide. In 1883, they established a base at the new railhead at Herget Springs in South Australia, which was later renamed Marree. This base soon became the hub of camel cartage, servicing virtually the whole of Central Australia.
We are currently in front of the oldest mosque in Australia that was built by the Afghan Cameleers in 1860. Probably really hard for the Cameleers when they had to pray at night and stuff, because today it was like 45 degrees and now it's still like 41, and at night it's probably going to be like 30. And imagine how hard it was for them when they had to come and pray every day.
Marree, the centre of Afghan activity in Australia, has the longest surviving Ghan town. Still living there are the descendants of Khanzada, Musha Baluch, Dadle Baluch, and Mullah Asim Khan. Each Afghan community had its own leader. In Udinadatta, it was Abdul Qadir, and in Marree, it was Berja Darwish. Berja was born in 1862 or 1867 in Mukrain, Baluchistan, and died in 1957 in Port Augusta. Prior to his arrival to Australia during his military service, he attained the rank of sergeant, serving in the Indian Army at Kandahar and Karachi. He arrived in Australia in 1891 and settled in Marree, where he bought land in 1902. He played a key role in the 1896-1897 Calvert expedition with explorer L.A. Wells. His oldest son, Abdul Jabbar, or Jack Beja, accompanied Madigan's 1931 Simpson Desert expedition. Berja's name is preserved in Berja Hill, on the edge of the sandy desert. So named by the explorer L.A. Wells on the 22nd of August 1896, after the faithful Berja. Berja is commemorated by a plaque on the Jubilee 150 walkway in Adelaide as one of 150 people who made a major contribution to the development of South Australia.
Last of the lords of the desert, who carried out food and water on a string of 50 camels. Old Bija de Verish, the giant Afghan, who fought the desert by compass and by Quran.
We are at the Marree cemetery, and we're in the Afghan section, and there's about 55 graves.
We're here next to Wahab Afghan's grave, and it looks like he was one of the few first cameleers to come to Australia, and he died in Adelaide but got buried here in Marree.
From the Urdu writing there, it looks like he was born in Kandahar in 1313 Hijri.
Zach, it looks like his whole family died here in Marree.
Yeah, probably.
It says at rest, all of his family. I'm pretty sure this grave is forgotten.
And it's not.
So it is. That is forgotten.
O Muhammad, leader of all goodness, take into thy counsels my cousin Abdul, son of Mahmud, son of the Haji Yosef, son of Hafiz, who perished alone in this stony desert far from the mountains of his homeland.
Marree, with its high concentration of cameleers, was soon referred to as Little Asia. It also became the centre for inland transport, with camel caravans leaving regularly for the Birdsville, Oodnadatta and Strudetsky tracks, Broken Hill, the Northern Territory and the Western Australian Goldfields.
We're going to take the Oodnadatta track from Marree to Marree. It's going to take roughly 2 days, and it's going to be extremely hot. Despite this is an off-road track, we're going to go there using a 2-wheel drive.
It's definitely 47 or 48 degrees on the...
Many inland towns had 3 distinct sections, one for the Europeans, one for the Aborigines, and a third section for the Afghans. There was contact between the Aboriginal and Afghan groups, but almost no contact between the Europeans and these two groups. Such segregation is well documented in Farina and Marree cemeteries, where the graveyards are divided along these racial lines.
The Oodnadatta track, and it was 47 to 46 degrees, and all of a sudden it started raining. 7th day of the trip, and we're stuck 17 kilometers away from the town Udnadata. Because of all the mud there, it's not meant to be for two-wheel drive.
It was successful when we went from Marree to Unadata, but from Unadata here on, we got stuck because of some rain and some mud. And now we're camping here in the car. If tomorrow the water and the mud doesn't go away, we have to go back to Unadata to find and seek help. So Shihab, do you like the trip so far?
Yeah, but sometimes it got hard and challenging.
How?
Like the time we got stuck in the mud, which is really recently.
Yeah. Did you like any bits about it?
Yeah, well, the towns. I like Marree, even though I've never been there.
And how do you know you like it?
Because then we'll be on road, and we won't have to suffer through all those dips.
How do you know we're going to be on road?
Because it's on the map. I thought you read a lot, Zach.
Yeah, I don't read maps, I read books. So we got bugged yesterday night and today in the morning. So we got out by using bushes and stuff, and now we're gonna go to Unadata to Coolgardie and take a different track. It's hot here in Coolgardie, but it's not as hot as in Marree and Unadata. And we finished the 700 kilometers of off-road, and we're heading towards the Northern Territory.
Stop us.
Save my boss. It saved my life.
I still am son.
It's brilliant.
The Cameleers carried almost all goods and services from South Australia to the Northern Territory. On a regular basis, they left Marree with their camel teams for Alice Springs. Some of the well-known among them were Hector Muhammad, Pierre Muhammad, and Charlie Sadadine. Sadadine was born in Baluchistan around 1870. By 1880, he was working as a camelman for Lord Roberts on the march to Kandahar. It is thought he immigrated to Australia after obtaining work near Udinadatta in South Australia at the time the railway line was completed in 1890. By 1914, he managed a strong of 120 to 130 camels, half belonging to him, the other half to Wallace & Co. Sadadine lived on Todd Street in Alice Springs, where the current Town Council building is located. He grew flowers, including at times opium, and was an imam leading the Cameleers community at a small mosque next to his garden. Sadadine died in Alice Springs in 1933, and his grave can be seen in the Alice Springs Cemetery. Sadadine's legacy in Alice Springs is remarkable. The Alice Springs suburb of Sadadine is named after him, as is Sadadine Primary School. Sadadine Range on the east of Alice Springs also takes his name, which was where he kept his camels.
We're at the Alice Springs telegraph station and we're next to the waterhole.
Apparently, the Cameleers brought their camels here to this waterhole to drink water. The people used to think it was a spring, that's why they called this place Alice Springs, but it turned out to just be a waterhole. We're at the Alice Springs Cemetery and we're at the Muslim section. This camel is sad because it's missing his mate. It's grave for Sadadine, who died on the 19th of July 1933. One of the most famous cameleers here in Alice Springs. They even named a street and a high school after him, and he's the one who started the fruit and vegetable market in Alice Springs Centre.
In 1873, Mohammed Salah, a pioneer cameleer, left Beltana for Western Australia with explorer P.E. Warburton. 2 years later, he also assisted Ernest Giles on one of his expeditions. J.W. Lewis, surveying the country northeast of Lake Eyre in 1874 and 1875, used camels and their Muslim drivers too. William Christie Goss was assisted by 3 cameleers in his attempt to find a way from the Finke River to Perth.
We're here in Windham at the silhouette that commemorates the Afghan cameleers. Camels and their Afghan handlers form an important part of Windham's history and the heritage of our region.
We're here in Windham in the Muslim cemetery, and here it says the graves are so large because the camel was buried with their master, which is actually not true because Muslims will never bury their pets with them. It's actually quite sad that these men, the hard-working men, are buried here far away from their family in India, Pakistan and Afghanistan.
In this isolated remote place, there are about 11 cameleer graves that are unmarked.
Muhammad Alam arrived sometime in the late 1880s, a young man in his 20s or 30s, eager to make his fortune. He was in charge of a team of 100 camels that transported from Perth all of the machinery used on the Goldfields. In 1903, he was present with his string of camels at the opening of the Perth to Coolgardie pipeline when Sir John Forrest praised the contribution of the camel men. The water pipe helped to put the cameleers out of business. So, like many others, Alam left the goldfields of Western Australia and headed east. He laboured in the mines of Broken Hill and was well known through inland Queensland and New South Wales. After years of hard physical toil across the Australian outback, Muhammad Alam finally settled in Adelaide in 1928, opening a herbalist's office at 181 Sturt Street. During the Great Depression, many poor and unemployed Australians found relief through herbal remedies. In 1935, Muhammad Alam boasted that 30,000 satisfied patients had supplied him with testimonials praising his abilities. He offered to pay £500 to charity if any of these endorsements could be proved false. Despite his success and public acclaim, Alam remained subject to the restrictions of the White Australia policy. He was denied the right to be naturalised for the rest of his life, even after he had lived in Australia for 65 years. Unlike many of his compatriots, however, he did not suffer in silence. In 1923, he declared himself ready to leave the country forever. "I have not had a fair chance to make a fair living anywhere in Australia," he wrote to the Minister for Home and Territories. "I am called an alien, and second, a blackfellow." He continued, "All I want is justice from King and Queen, Sovereign and Crown, and yourself." Alam never learned to read or write English, but aided by his wife and friends, he wrote letters to the press and published at least 15 pamphlets on Islam, the Quran, illness and his healing powers. He died on the 21st of March 1964 at his large home at Everard Park in Adelaide at 108 years of age. His funeral procession from Adelaide Mosque to the Centennial Park Cemetery was over a mile long.
Take you on a whirlwind track, way back to south is the city. Matter of fact, immersed in desert plains, a barren land, our tale starts here. A place called the Ghan, no roads, no cars, not a way to get around. How to grow the town to the top from the ground. This land is rich with lots of treasure. Beyond all your means, it has every man's measure.
We're at the Muslim cemetery in Burke. This is where lots of Malay pearl fighters and Afghan cameleers lay.
As you can see, this cemetery is in poor condition and it needs some urgent help from the community.
People didn't really take care of this place.
Yeah.
All the branches and stuff that fell down. And some of them fell on the grave back there.
Yeah, it definitely needs help.
This is the Japanese cemetery. It's neat and tidy. And the Muslim cemetery needs to get, someone really needs to look after it.
They're handy, willing a cart.
So we've done 9,000 kilometres and there's about 3,000 kilometres left to go. And we're going to make it to Monkey Mile so we can rest and play.
Yeah, I can't wait to go to Monkey Mile. We'll get to see dolphins, camels, and hopefully swim.
And stay in a hotel, maybe.
The road flooded from the cyclone Joyce, and now we had to cross it to see how deep it was.
The car's crossed already, and hopefully there's no major damage to the car or any damage at all.
They all just band my ode and honor to the custodians of the land.
Follow the journey you tell, passed into legend. From the desert to the land of morning crescent. Sign of friendship, alliances with ties that bind. Their art is priceless, etched in the memory of humankind.
Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the Ghan and star. Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the Ghan and star. Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the Ghan and star. Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the Ghan and star. AFG Cameleers in the house from their homes up north.
We came here to look for Dost Muhammad's grave, but we couldn't find it. But we found Aziz Abdullah in 1930 and Ahmed bin David in 1929.
Dost Muhammad is another native of Baluchistan. He arrived in Australia in 1886. He was a cameleer and proprietor in Port Hedland, in the Pilbara region of northwestern Australia. He used his animals to transport goods between the ports and remote inland mining and pastoral settlements of the Goldfields, Pilbara and Murchison regions of Western Australia at the end of the 19th century. He married Annie Grigo from Coolgardie and they had 5 children. He assisted 2 of Annie's brothers in gaining employment and becoming established in business. The brothers were heavy drinkers, sometimes violent, and not always respectful of Muslim practices. Unfortunately, in 1909, he was killed in a brawl at Port Hedland by his wife's 2 brothers. They were later acquitted of murder. Annie went with her 5 children to India in August 1910 after her husband's death. She was knifed to death while her 2 youngest children lay alongside, as revenge by 2 of her husband's nephews. Dost Muhammad was one of the first 8 cameleers who arrived at Melbourne from Karachi on the ship Chinsura on the 9th of June 1860, providing camel transport for the Burke and Wills expedition. Sometime after, he helped to recover the bodies of Burke and Wills. He was bitten by a bull camel. It lifted him off the ground and shook him with great ease, as a cat would shake a mouse, one eyewitness reported. His arm was permanently disabled thereafter. He desperately wanted to return to his homeland, but he was never to see his people and country of birth again. After campaigning for funds to return on several occasions, he died in 1862 in Menindee and is buried there, the first cameleer to lie at rest in Australian soil. The Menindee District Progress Association erected a headstone on his grave in 1952. For nearly 1 century prior to that, the grave was unmarked, and the locals refer to it as the grave of an Arab.
Catch a glimpse of this beast would give me a trip. Big ass nose and a hump or 2 ready to spit. Loyal and efficient, these things are smart and dang. the handy wheel in a cart.
Look at Amir Jahan's grave, one of the cameleers. It's very sad, and we have to do something about it. This is Coolgardie's grave. He died on the 27th of January, 1953. His age was 86, and it's sad that no one had looked after his grave.
The Cameleers and their teams worked under conditions too harsh for other transporters, carrying cargoes across the outback for weeks in scorching summers and the piercing cold of winter in some of the harshest terrain in the world. With their camels, who received more publicity than their owners, they helped with the construction of the overland telegraph line and railways, erected fences, acted as guides for several major expeditions, and supplied almost every inland mine or station with its goods and services.
Friends build stronger ties. Afghan and Aboriginal, the bond was true. Just like the baby Joey and mother kangaroo. The love and respect, they all just band. My ode and honor to the custodians of the land.
Follow the journey, it'll pass into legend. From the desert to the land of morning crescent. Sign of friendship, alliances with ties that bind. Their art is priceless, etched in the memory of humankind.
Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the gene and star. Say I am, you are, we are.
Did you like the trip? Yeah, I mean, I thought the trip was nice. Like, we've seen a lot of good things. Yes.
But the bad things about it was like it's very hot.
Yeah, very hot.
We got stuck in the mud.
But it was worth it.
Yeah. We got to see lots of nice stuff too.
Yes, the views, cemetery and room. Yeah, also the Adelaide mosque.
And the Windham cemetery, that was the worst. They said that the camels were buried with them, which is very fake.
Yeah, lie.
It was worth it.
Yes, it was a worth it trip. We see lots of beautiful views. We got to know about our heritage here in Australia, which is also great.
And the rich history of Muslims in Australia.
Yes, we have lots of history here. I was surprised. I bet you were too, because we had no idea that there were Muslims that used to live here and that contributed to Australia in lots of ways. They helped build the railways.
They carried goods and they explored inland.
Yes, Zach.
It's fascinating and amazing, the contribution of them.
Somehow Australians tell us to come back to where we came from. And that's not a good thing to say, especially when we contributed to Australia.
Just brought in the thunder, and the men they followed in the land down under.
Follow the journey, it'll pass into legend. From the desert to the land of morning crescent. Sign of friendship, alliances with ties that bind. Their art is priceless, etched in the memory of humankind.
The moment they arrived, they just couldn't take 5. They left their parents, the land's kids and wives, but still they strived and worked around the clock. From rocks to cement, shipping all kinds of stock. Not treated as equals, but they don't stop. They come to love the land, they began to adopt the culture of the natives, all the lows and highs. They got married, made friends, built stronger ties. Afghan and Aboriginal, the bond was true. Just like the baby Joey and mother kangaroo. The love and respect, they all just band. My ode and honor to the custodians of the land.
Follow the journey, it'll pass into legend. From the desert to the land of morning crescent. Sign of friendship, alliances with ties that bind. Their art is priceless, etched in the memory of humankind.
Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the gene and star. Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the gene and star. Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the gene and star. Say I am, you are, we are, united as one under the gene and star. AFG Cameleers in the house, from their homes up north to the land down south, provides a history for none to ignore, legacies stitching the echelons of folklore, from raising the Ghan rail to Broken Hill, telegraph lines, the mines, and overall skill. Port Hedland, Coolgardie, Farina and Marree, the men and the camels were just legendary. Das Tag and Gul Muhammad, Charlie Sadadine, every single one of them you are much esteemed. May you and your progeny be blessed for years. Thus concludes the story of the Muslim Cameleers.
Follow the journey it passed into legend, from the desert to the land of morning crescent. Sign of friendship, alliances with ties that bind. Their art is priceless, etched in the memory of humankind.